All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you all very much for coming out to today's pre-law shadowers session. We're so incredibly grateful to have Stacy Petriuk joining us today. Stacy is a lawyer with JSS Barristers out of Calgary, Alberta. So without further ado, I will give Stacy the floor. Stacy, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Landon. I really appreciate this opportunity to address the pre-law shadowers. And while the group might be not huge today, I understand the meeting is going to be recorded so people can take a look at it maybe later. I'm very honored to speak, and I'm a little curious how you found me, but that's okay. So I know people's time is valuable, and I want to make sure that I cover topics that are of interest to you, and that I'm not wasting your time or talking about something that's not relevant to you or not of interest to you. And I guess I need to remind myself it's been a long time since I was your age. So my plan is to provide a little bit of information about myself and my background and my career and sort of my journey, and then open it up to questions. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So as Landon indicated, I'm a partner at JSS Barristers in Calgary, Alberta. We're a civil litigation boutique firm. We consist of 34 lawyers and one articling student at the current time, and we just do civil litigation and dispute resolution. So we don't do any criminal, we don't do any family, we don't do any solicitor's work, we don't do real estate transactions, we just do civil litigation. But within civil litigation, there's a wide variety. I practice mostly corporate, commercial, and professional negligence defense work, but I have partners and associates who practice things like arbitrations, employment law, bankruptcy and insolvency, estates litigation, personal injury work, product liability, and class actions. So there's a wide variety of work that we do within civil litigation. Personally, I'll give you a little bit of information about me and my background. I have a BA from Queen's, and my major was political studies. And then I went to the University of Calgary for law school. I was born in Calgary, so I didn't want to come back here. And I graduated in 1996 with my LLB. I was called to the bar in 1997. I articled at a mid-sized firm in Calgary called Parley McLaws. But right after I finished articling, I knew I wanted to practice civil litigation, so I came to what's known now as JSS Barristers. I joined, believe it or not, my current firm as its first associate back in 1997 when it was the 4 original partners and me. So there's been a big amount of growth between the time that I joined and now, because now we're up to effectively 35 lawyers.
Wow.
I was made a partner in, and I was trying to remember, I think it's 2004, but it could have been 2005. I've been also managing partner of the firm. I was managing the partner for the firm for 3 years from 2015 to 2018. I should backtrack a little bit. I took a leave of absence from the firm for about 1 year to go and do my master's. I graduated in 2001 with my master's of law from the University of Cambridge in the UK. I wanted to provide a little bit of information about sort of, I don't know what the right term was. I want to call it extracurricular activities, but my big extracurricular activity right now is I'm an elected bencher of the Law Society of Alberta. Lawyers are a self-governing profession, and basically benchers are the board of directors of the Law Society. And I sit on that board of directors effectively. And so benchers are involved in governance and policy with respect to the Law Society, but also adjudication, which deals with conduct matters and complaint matters when lawyers basically get in trouble and things like that. So within the Law Society, I do a bunch of different things. I'm chair of the Audit and Finance Committee. I'm vice chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee. And previously, I chaired the Bencher Election Task Force, which was tasked with increasing the diversity of the candidates and ultimately the benchers sitting at the bencher table, which I'm quite happy to say I think we've got a pretty diverse group of benchers now, so that's good. And I was vice chair of the Lawyer Competence Committee, which means I've taken maybe an extra close look at things like articling and how we judge lawyer competence. So personally, I'm married to another lawyer. Maybe that's not that surprising. And we have one daughter and she's 15 years old. notwithstanding all of that, I do have hobbies and interests outside the practice of law, but I won't get into those. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about me to sort of set the stage, but I'm interested in knowing what questions you have for me, because I understand, talking with Landon, that these kinds of sessions are attended by people who are interested in attending law school. And I guess I would say I really, really enjoy my job. I find it intellectually stimulating, and I feel very fortunate to practice with people that I like, doing work that I like to do. So I would never actually ever discourage anyone from pursuing law school or going to law school. I've really enjoyed my 25 plus year career, and I'm happy to give back to the profession. So with those comments, I'm happy to answer any questions people have.
So I'll start off with a couple questions that I have.
Sure.
I guess we'll start even just before kind of university, maybe even prior to that. Did you always kind of know law was something you wanted to get into, or was it something that kind of you stumbled upon and were like, you know, I'm really interested in this? I'm just kind of curious how you got into law exactly.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I definitely wasn't one of those people like the 12-year-old who wants to be a lawyer. I didn't really decide that I wanted to apply and go to law school until I was working on a master's degree that I never finished. And I took a course that was a law course, and I thought it was very interesting. And I originally actually didn't ever entertain law school because my sister had gone to law school and I wasn't necessarily interested in competing with that. But once I had taken this one course in university that was a legal course, and I found it quite interesting, I thought, hey, I think this might be for me. And so no, it was not something that I always wanted to do.
Well, that's it's obviously kind of interesting talking to other lawyers and talking to other people, because some of them say, absolutely, this definitely wasn't something I wanted to go into. And then, you know, you have your others that, exactly like you said, 12 years old, they went, you know, I really enjoy arguing, be it with my parents, be it with other people, but they want to go to law school, they want to get into it. So I guess kind of just touching back, kind of starting from the beginning, as you mentioned, was there any really, I know you mentioned you're from Calgary, was there any real particular reason that you attended the law school you went to?
Yeah, I mean, I recall, and I realize it's much different nowadays applying in terms of the competitiveness. And my suspicion is that it's more competitive now in terms of applications to law schools. I don't know what the percentage is in terms of the percentage of people who apply and the percentage of people who get admitted. But what I do recall, Landon, is I did not apply to every law school in Canada. I only applied to schools that I was interested in. And the reason I applied to U of C is because I was fairly confident that I wanted to practice law in Calgary. And I thought, rightly or wrongly, and I certainly don't think this is actually a legitimate reason, but I can tell you what my reason was. I thought that I'd want to practice law in Calgary, so it made sense to go to the U of C, I guess, so that your foundation would be more in the provincial law of Alberta as opposed to the provincial law of another province. But I'm not sure that's a valid reason, but that was the reason that I had.
Okay, gotcha. I mean, that still is a pretty valid reason in my opinion. I mean, just even sometimes we hear with lawyers, especially because you went to Queens originally and then came back, sometimes we hear like maybe they wanted just to travel a little bit more, or they knew that they wanted to go to, let's say, one of the top schools in Canada. So I always kind of I like to ask that to obviously kind of get some insight as to why maybe you chose that law school. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I add on to that? I think there might be different considerations nowadays, because first of all, I don't think it matters in terms of where you go to law school, because you know, we've certainly hired articling students and associates at our firm that have gone to law school in, you know, many different provinces. So I honestly don't think that matters anymore. So I think my concern is not a legitimate concern, but I think there is a factor that might be at play more now than it was when I was applying and going to law school, and that's the difference in the different tuitions.
Oh, okay, right.
So tuition, various law schools varies widely across the country, right? And so that wasn't a factor for me, but I can understand why that may be a factor for some people. The other thing that could be a factor, I wasn't offered any scholarships at any law schools. And so obviously that would be a factor for somebody too, if they got money from somewhere.
Gotcha. You touched on the tuition differences that are, that vary between each province. Do you have any insight that you could provide on that? Because personally, I know a little bit about it, but you're obviously the professional. Do you have any insight that you could provide that maybe other students that are watching this could obviously take to heart?
Yeah. So, well, people should probably research how much stuff's going to cost, right? So I don't know off the top of my head what U of A and U of C costs, but the deans of those schools would say they're cheaper than Ryerson or Lakehead, let's say, or definitely cheaper than U of T.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I know I just had one prof recently. Well, they were from Quebec. They like to talk about how cheap law school was in Quebec, but I mean, they also did it in their French speaking as well. So something that maybe only a percentage of us can actually do. So the only reason I just asked that, I just thought you might be able to just shed some light on it, but obviously you did, and I agree. You're right. You probably should do some research because you got to factor in a couple different things, obviously like cost of living and even just a different environment that you're living in. So I think
I think that's right. I would say a couple things. One, depending, like for example, I think that a Quebec university is cheaper for a Quebec resident than it would be for me, for example. Like I think there might be some provinces may have differentiation based on your residency within Canada. Obviously, all the universities are going to have differentiation based on whether or not you're an international student versus a Canadian student. That's one thing. I think Memorial might fall into that category as well.
Right. Okay.
And then the other thing is that those older, more established schools might have more money to offer too. That would be the flip side. So U of T might cost more, but it might actually have more money to offer its students. So I wouldn't discourage anybody from applying, but I think it's from a university because I think it's too expensive, but rather I think that you've got to, when it comes down to making a decision, it's obviously going to be part of your calculation.
Absolutely. It's good to obviously have that insight for sure. Because it's something a lot of us, like even the pre-law students or people that are watching, mom and dad pay for a lot of it, and really they do. I'm no different than anyone else probably watching. But it's something obviously, we have to grow up at some point, become adults, right? So something definitely to keep in mind, and really we don't talk about enough. So I'll get back kind of into your career a little bit. So you talked about how mainly your firm and mainly yourself, you do civil litigation.
Yes.
Could you maybe talk about how you got into sort of that area of law? Was it something that you really wanted to go into, or was it something that kind of fell into your lap and you went, I'm going to take this and run with it?
No, it was a very conscious decision of mine. So all through law school, Landon, I did mooting and debating. So like every single year first years aren't on moot teams, but in second year and third year, I was on moot teams. I did the Gale Cup moot in second year, and I did the corporate securities moot in third year. So I always knew that I wanted to do, I wanted to be a litigator. I never at any point in my law school career or at any point in my career did I want to be a solicitor. And so when I articled at the firm of Parley McLaws, which is a mid-sized firm, and it's full service. And when I finished my articles and they offered me a position, it was not a position in their litigation department. It was a position in their solicitor department. So they didn't have space for me or a need for me in litigation. And so I did probably what any prudent person would do. I said, thank you very much, took the job and started looking for a job that I actually wanted. So I applied at my current firm, which was back then a boutique civil litigation firm. And I think about it now, because I'm not sure I would have had the guts to do what I did then to do it now. But I was the first associate, and we just did civil litigation. Now, I took that position knowing, I guess, that I could be sitting here 25 plus years later and still be the only associate with the 4 original partners. But it worked out much better for me than that, which was the firm grew. So I was the only associate for the first 2.5 years.
Wow, that's
And
incredible.
right before I let them know that I was going away to Cambridge for a year to do my master's, they hired the second associate. And I was
Wow.
relieved because I felt like, oh my God, I don't feel so bad leaving now. And
Mhm.
interestingly enough, that second associate, he got appointed to the bench.
Wow, that's incredible.
Just a little bit. Yeah, he left our firm to go do privacy work for the police, for the Calgary Police Service. So he was there for about 5 years, and then he got appointed to the bench, but that's besides the point. Anyway, and then right around the time I was leaving, the third associate was hired, and then things got quite, the firm grew quite a bit. And it was a conscious decision to grow, because in order to do certain kind of work, you need to be able to be a certain size. And in order to attract good people, you need to have a career path. And it's hard to have a career path if you don't have, people at every level. So, yeah, I mean, I very much sought out and took this position because it was doing the kind of work that I wanted to do. I wasn't prepared. I was not prepared to compromise on that particular issue in any way, shape, or form.
Gotcha. So maybe just one of the follow-up questions I have to that, for those that don't know who are watching, what's the difference between a barrister and a solicitor that you could shed some light on?
So at the very sort of, barristers might say that barristers are real lawyers and solicitors aren't real lawyers. But anyway, basically what it means is that every single file that I have could potentially end up in trial.
Okay.
Is a really easy way of thinking about it. Whereas solicitor work would be things like putting together deals, stuff that's more transactional, and not things where you go to court. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So they're doing a lot of, obviously, the paperwork and sort of the paper side of it. Well, maybe not all the time, but like you said, you're the one that's actually going to court and going to trial.
It's a little different because we're not working on the same files. They're different files entirely. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So I guess I'm just kind of going to get more into your career. I have a couple more questions about that.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've been able to argue at all these, like from the trial court level to the superior court level in Alberta. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have not gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but I have argued in front of the Court of Appeal, and obviously I've conducted trials as well. Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating to me. Could you kind of share a little bit about your experience, maybe even just your emotions while you were arguing at some of these high-level courts?
Yeah, I guess. I think if you are interested in litigation and that's what you want to do, that is sort of like going to court and being in trial, or being in front of an appeal court and arguing something is really the apex of what we do. It's the best part of my job, right? It's a bit bittersweet though, because it's the hardest on clients and it's pretty expensive. So it's not always, even though it's like the best thing that I get to do, it is very hard on clients. And it's very expensive. And usually it's better for clients if things can resolve without having to go to trial. Right. But the other thing that I always tell our juniors is trial makes everything else make sense. So unless you have that kind of experience, sort of from the beginning to running a file, a lot of the stuff you do in between doesn't necessarily make sense because you take steps that are to prepare yourself for trial. And if you never do the trial part of it, you don't necessarily understand what you're doing to make what the steps that you're taking because they're focused on trial. And if you never get there, then you don't necessarily understand why you're doing that.
Right.
But,
okay.
I love it. Honestly, like I love being in court. I love hearing myself speak. I love trying to get my point across in an organized, logical manner. I love having a conversation with the court. I love thinking outside the box, and I love trying to be creative about stuff.
So it sounds like absolutely, like you say, you love your job. It's literally something that you're meant for. If you love all these things, and pretty much being a lawyer, well, that's not all of it, but it's a good part of it, right? So it sounds like you found your niche pretty well, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I feel pretty fortunate. I get to do work that I enjoy with people that I like to work with. So I don't know if it gets much better than that.
Oh, that's good to hear. I mean, that's everyone's dream, to be honest with you.
Yeah. The one part I can't, like, I can comment, you guys can think about whether or not it's going to be work that you're going to like. The part about whether or not you're going to work with people you like, that's under your control, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, something's going to happen too, right? But, you make it work, right? Like, I even know personally I'm in that boat right now, but, you make it work as best you can. I just want to kind of get into the fact that your venture on the Law Society of Alberta, I think is absolutely incredible. Could you maybe just describe your role just a little bit more? I know you described it already and kind of gave a good background of it. Or maybe could you talk about the importance of the Law Society of Alberta?
Yeah. And so, like, a lot of lawyers don't necessarily want anything to do with the Law Society because we're a self-regulating profession like accountants or doctors would be. And as a result of that, it's not the government that regulates us, but rather we regulate ourselves. But and so there's an act called the Legal Profession Act, which basically establishes the Law Society and provides sort of the skeleton of what the Law Society is supposed to do. It's actually 3 pillars, I want to say. I'm not going to get them right. It's insurance, competency, and basically conduct that the Law Society is responsible for. So we take an interest in all sorts of things that cover that. So with respect to competency, one of the things that the Law Society of Alberta is looking at right now is lawyer competency and what sort of differences or changes or things we need to do to improve that. And so maybe about a year and a half ago, the Law Society of Alberta actually blew up its competency requirement. So we were a bit of an outlier of all the law societies in Canada. Most law societies in Canada have a requirement of so many continuing legal education hours per year in order to maintain your competency.
Okay.
Alberta Law Society did not have that. We had a different requirement. We called it continuing professional development. And it was more like a declaration about what you're planning on doing. But we didn't have an hours requirement with respect to it. We took away that requirement and said, we need to take a closer look at this and whether or not that's still sort of meeting our needs. It had been in place for over a decade, like probably since about 2002, that particular system. So it really did need, it might have been mid 20 years, like it needed to be looked at. Okay. So we blew it up. We said that requirement's not going to happen right now. Instead, they created the Lawyer Competency Committee, on which I was the vice chair, and we commissioned a report by a fellow named Jordan Furlong, who's kind of a legal futurist, to take a look at lawyer competency from sort of articling early years, the rest of the years, and make some recommendations. That report is public. It's on the Law Society website. And we are now, the benchers approve the report, but that doesn't mean that the benchers are going to do everything in the report. And so now we're working through the report to figure certain things out. And so we're looking at things like alternatives to articling. We're looking at things like, do we put some continuing competency requirements in the form of hours or courses for the first few years? Do we rethink competency in the older years? Like, can you qualify for your competency by teaching or by being a principal or by doing something else, that kind of stuff. So we're taking a look at all that stuff and trying to be pretty like creative and forward thinking about it. A couple of things that we've done that we're pretty excited about. Some of them intersect with the committee that I currently vice chair, which is Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. One thing we did do, and we did make a mandatory requirement for all Alberta lawyers, is that they're to take an Indigenous cultural competency course called the PATH Alberta. So the Canadian Bar Association created a course called the PATH, and it's basically like, it's about 5 or 6 hours. It's a webinar-based course, and you take it and you learn a whole bunch of stuff about Indigenous, like before contact, about the treaties, about Indigenous history, and a bunch of that sort of stuff. Because we felt it was important for all Alberta lawyers to have some sort of base level of knowledge when it comes to Indigenous cultural competency. I think BC is doing something similar and other provinces are doing something like that, but that's certainly not a universal thing. So we're doing that. The other thing that we decided is that mentoring is really important, and not everybody has good mentors. And so when people now are getting admitted to the bar, I think it starts in September, they sort of automatically get enrolled in our Mentor Express. They can opt out of it if they've got some other mentoring relationship set up, but we want to make sure people have access to mentoring. So we're working our way through this report to deal with some of these competency issues. That's like a little example of the kind of work that we do from sort of a policy or governance perspective at the Law Society. And that's the sort of stuff that I find like super interesting. And I think about people like you, Len, and people who are going to be applying to law school, and other people listening today who are going to be applying to law school. And we actually just had a retreat at the beginning of June, and we invited a bunch of different people, and our topic for the retreat was alternatives to articling. And so we had deans from the law schools of U of A, U of C, U of Vic, I think UBC, Ryerson, Lakehead, and they commented on some of their courses. So for example, Ryerson and Lakehead both have the it's called IPC. What does it stand for? Like it's a kind of like a co-op program within the law school. So some of the stuff that you do at law school would count towards your articling. We also had a woman from the Solicitors Regulatory Authority in the UK, and they have kind of like a legal clinic at one of the universities that sort of provides that too. Then we also had somebody from Ontario talking about the LPP, which we don't have in Alberta. We don't have an LPP equivalent. I don't know if you know what that is.
No, could you maybe touch
Yeah, so you guys know that once you do law school, so you do your 3 years of law school, you're not a lawyer. What you need to do then is have some sort of supervised practice. And so in most provinces, including Alberta, that supervised practice is articling. So in Alberta, after you do your law school, you need to article we've changed it because of COVID, it doesn't have to be 12 months, but usually it's 12 months. And what that articling position usually means is you've got a principal, which means you've got a senior lawyer who's responsible for you and guiding you through this process. And you have to take like a course requirement. In Alberta, it's called PREP, Practice Readiness Education Program or something. And we share the PREP program with Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia. But anyway, you take this PREP course and you do supervised practice. And after the 12-month period, you apply to the Law Society, and the Law Society decides whether you've met the criteria in order to be admitted to the bar. And so that's how it works. So when we talk about alternatives to articling, what we're talking about is there some other way people can get that supervised practice requirement other than articling with the principal? And so the LPP in Ontario is an example of an alternative to that supervised practice requirement with a principal, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that does make sense.
Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a journey. And I wouldn't expect people applying to law school to think too much about articling, but it is a necessary component after law school. If you want to practice in Canada, you do have to be admitted to a bar, and there's requirements, competency requirements that you need to fulfill as a result of that.
Right, and that makes sense. And I think it's obviously something like, obviously someone like myself who is a pre-law student, we don't really think about that because it's so far down the road, right? But it's one of those things that eventually we're going to have to do, right? Like you said, and it's something that we don't really have a lot of insight on because no one really, like I said, we don't really think about it yet because we kind of go, well, my real goal right now, even just personally speaking, is just to get into law school, right? So once I get there, then, you know, everyone just kind of thinks, oh, yay, hats off, it's great after that. But no, there's there's a lot of process that goes into it. So I think even just having the insight that you're providing just kind of gives us an idea of what we're really in for, because, you know, like I said, the real world's going to hit you. It's not just you getting into law school and with you're a lawyer, right? So I think you just giving that insight and you taking the time to give me that answer is absolutely fantastic. And personally, I can actually attest. So you mentioned the Indigenous cultural education program that's being done in Alberta. So my company's based out of BC. They personally made us do it, even though I'm here in Ontario. And right now we're even pushing for the Ontario government to do it as well. So something that we're kind of getting on the right path of, which I'm very happy about personally. So
Yeah, we've actually had pretty really good response to it, because you wonder when you impose something on 10, like there's 10,000 lawyers that we govern in Alberta. You impose something on 10,000 lawyers and say, hey, by the way, you need to do this now. You're not really sure what kind of pushback you're going to get. Lawyers tend to be a little bit like, I don't know, chippy. And so but people were really positive about it. And I think to a certain extent that probably, I'm going to say, the last 16 or so months, and I don't want to, I mean, maybe I'm saying this from a privileged position, but I do think that there's been a little bit of a change in society where people are thinking about things maybe a little bit differently. I mean, there's obviously like the sort of the radicals, like the people who are putting surveillance on the Chief Justice of the Court of Manitoba. But there's also like, I think people really sort of being hit between the eyes about some of the situation that we never ever learned about. So a good example would be, I did the path. There's nothing about unmarked graves at residential schools in the path.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
right?
That's right.
Like, and now that's the news.
Yeah, that's right.
Like there's pretty much every single residential school has a whole bunch of unmarked graves. Like
right.
That's not like, and Indigenous people were aware of this. It's just the rest of Canada coming to the realization, like, oh my goodness. Yeah. But that's an example. Like there's still like you do the path and there's still stuff like that coming out, which is sort of shocking.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
Just kind of getting back into what you were talking about. Obviously, like you said, you're part of a lot of organizations. You're on the chairs of a lot of these councils, and these. I can imagine how cutthroat they have to be just to even get in. How have these roles that you've had kind of shaped, or maybe let's say helped your career, or maybe even outside of your career? Have you made friends or work associates because of it?
So I'm going to answer that question, Landon, but before I do that, I just want to go back to this articling thing. I don't want to freak everybody out about the articling stuff, because law schools will help students get through this process. And law schools really, really, really care about the percentage of their students that get articles.
Right.
Like they pretty much want almost 100% of their students to get an article. So this is something they really care about and they really focus on. So law schools, once you're in, they're going to provide you with a ton of support when it comes to that, because they really care about that. Okay, so just, I didn't want to freak anybody out. But you're not going to, it's a whole process. They might try to, funnel you towards a certain thing, which might be articling in a big firm, but there's a lot, like they care about that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to say that. So your question about the stuff that I've been involved in and how that sort of helped. The one thing I do think about this from the perspective of, obviously it's important to give back, but when you're a practicing lawyer, you do have a certain basket of skills that can be quite beneficial to different organizations, specifically boards. Usually I've sat on a few boards. I've just last year, I guess, I finished up a 6-year term with the Calgary Arts Development Authority, which is the arm's length organization of the City of Calgary that distributes the City of Calgary funding to the arts in Calgary. And it was very rewarding and very fulfilling. Partly it's because I got to interact with people who weren't lawyers, and partly it was because, I'm in a totally different milieu, which is the arts world as opposed to the legal world. But the thing is that lots of boards want at least one board member that's a lawyer. So there's lots of good opportunities for lawyers with respect to positions on boards of directors. So I do encourage people, once they become lawyers and they feel like they've got their feet under them and they feel like they've got some time to give back, there's lots of really good ways to find out about that. Sometimes it's advertised through like the Canadian Bar Association might get postings of board of director positions that are looking for applications. Or there's also websites. I know in Calgary, the website is, I want to say it's Propel Us. But yeah, definitely. there's those opportunities. And the one thing I will say too is that boards really care about diversity right now. Hopefully they continue to care about it, but we certainly cared about it at the Calgary Arts Development Authority, and we care about it at the Law Society, that we've got a diverse board of directors. And so really, like, if you've got any concerns about maybe not being the right person for it, I'd still do it, because there's probably something that you can offer that they don't have in terms of diversity. So I would never discourage anybody from doing that.
Wonderful. And I mean, it sounds like it's paid off for you. Just getting I shouldn't say it like that, getting as far as where you are now. I shouldn't say it like that, but you know what I mean? Like, just the fact that you're able to create all these new relationships, these new, build your education and build your, expand your mind, I guess, as kind of, for lack of a better term, about, the things that go on, rather than just solely your job. You have other aspects in your life that you're able to enjoy and, make, like you said, make policy even for that can, help shape or shift law, or the future of law in just even in Alberta, right? So.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important too, because I do think it's important that, obviously, that these different boards have a good diversity on them, so that they're more representative of society generally, and realizing that you've got something to offer and something to give back. And then it probably comes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I suspect that some people might be in a position to not put their name forward or apply unless they feel like they can fit the description like 100%. But I guess I'm saying, don't worry about that.
No, I gotcha. That makes sense. So Stacy, I'm pretty much finished up with my questions here. I just have one more left for you. Just kind of someone who's had such an extremely triumphant career, honestly, with just everything you've talked about, what you're doing right now. What advice would you say that you could give to the people that are watching, or the people that maybe will be watching, just maybe in general, about, the field of law school, applying for work in the legal field, or maybe just words of wisdom in general? Is there anything that you can kind of touch base about or attest to?
Like that's a good question. I was thinking about that. Like, what would I have told myself back then? Probably to relax a little bit and not be so kind of uptight about stuff. It's easier said than done, but I probably would have said to relax a little bit. Although I don't regret anything. So I'm happy with, what things are done. But I guess, making sure that you follow your heart and what you really want to do, and not what other people might tell you to do or think you should do. But it's really important for you to know why you're doing what you're doing, and that you're doing it for the right reasons.
Right. And I think sometimes we forget about that, or we get lost in it. Just the idea of being a lawyer and the moolah maybe takes over and kind of gives you that idea, right? Sorry, I know you were going to mention something, so I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No. Or maybe that's what your parents thought you should do, or, you can't think of anything better to do, that kind of thing. And I also really want to encourage anybody who's interested in applying to law school to apply, to sort of, even if they don't necessarily see themselves reflected in the judiciary or the professors or the senior members of the bar. We need to really increase diversity in law school, in the legal profession, in the judiciary, everywhere. And so even if you don't see yourself represented, I don't want anybody to be discouraged about that, because we need more diversity when it comes to law students.
That's wonderful, and I really appreciate you bringing that insight to us. So that's all the questions I have. I know a couple students had to leave. They were sending me messages, but I do have a couple questions here that sent me a couple messages. So Maddie, he actually asked, what made you want to get your master's of law? Was there something that happened, or was it something you always wanted to do?
It's funny, because I was actually talking to our most recent associate about this yesterday, because I had coffee with her. And it wasn't really anything more than I didn't feel like I was done with school. And so I really just felt like I wanted to go back and take a year to do my master's. Not because I had any particular ulterior motive with respect to it. I just thought that I didn't feel like I was finished with school, and I felt like I wanted to pursue it, and I felt like I could. I was also very fortunate because my husband, who I met in law school, and so he's the same year of college as me, he also had the same desire. And we applied to the same law schools, and we both got admitted to Cambridge. And so we both could go and do our LLM at the same time. I don't know, like if he would have not been able to go, or I would have not been able to go, I don't know what would have happened, but I think I also felt very fortunate. So he sort of felt the same thing. I think he wanted to change the trajectory of the kind of law he was practicing a little bit, and it gives that good opportunity. But it also feels like something, if I, at that point, if I wanted to go and do something different, I had more opportunities, you know, with an LLM. So I was glad. You know what? It was a completely luxurious year. I feel very fortunate and realized very privileged for being able to do it. And I also kind of came to the conclusion that it was going to be easier than law school, because I sort of spent a lot of hours every day working on stuff that I didn't necessarily want to work on as a result of being a practicing lawyer. So if I go back to school and I'm choosing to do that, I'm going to be much more disciplined. Doesn't that sound weird? And I think I was. Like, I think I really was much more appreciative of the experience because I had practiced for a few years before I went back and did it. And so I just took the year off, and I did my master's, and then I came back. We traveled a bit, and then we came back to work. It was nice. It was like a nice thing to do. And then it makes the decision, you know, to stay in Calgary and do that feel much more deliberate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, it's something that obviously I think, would you recommend it perhaps maybe to other people or for people down the road if they were interested in looking into it?
Sorry, say that again. You cut out just slightly.
Yeah, no problem. Would you recommend going to get your master's of law perhaps down the road, like to other people, if they were perhaps to, you know, have the same sort of idea as yourself?
I mean, it's like lots of people finish law school and think, that's it, I've had enough. No, like, I'm not going back to school. It's going to cost too much money, whatever. So, I mean, it's not for everybody for sure. And you're going to find this hard to believe, Landon, but whatever, 20 years ago when I went and did it, because I graduated in 2001, people actually said kind of crappy things to me about it. Like, you're not going to make more money, you know. What are you doing that for? Like, really kind of quite like ignorant things. And
Yeah.
so like, I don't know if people would say that kind of stuff nowadays. Like, I think people might not say such crappy things to people going off and doing their masters now. So you could be kind of resolved in it. But if anybody had an interest in that, I would totally encourage it. I would never discourage it, because I found it, like, personally extremely rewarding. The other thing that I would do, and I realize I come at this from a position of privilege and not everybody's got this particular situation, but I would discourage an executive LLM and encourage actually being able to take the time off and go and do it. Now I realize financially not everybody can do that, or for whatever reason, maybe their family situation that they can't do it. But I think that's really good when you can kind of like not be pulled in a bunch of different directions. And then the last thing, I think we talked about tuition before, but people need to really take a look at what their options are. Because I talked about money being available at older schools. And I would say that it didn't cost me any more money to go to Cambridge than it would have cost me to do a degree in an LLM in Canada.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. It's wonderful insight. Obviously, it's not something that, I mean, I personally think of, but I mean, I have had it mentioned to me by either other lawyers or other people in the field that I've worked with that have their masters, and I've heard nothing but wonderful things. So it's great that you can provide the insight, and I thank you very much for that.
And I should provide a qualification on that. One is because I think there's more money available in scholarships and bursaries at those schools. Like, I think Cambridge had more money to offer me than universities in Canada. So like, I got a scholarship from Cambridge, but I don't recall being offered scholarship, like much money by any school in Canada. And the other thing is the way that it works tax-wise and the fact that you can deduct your tuition. So if you've worked for a few years, and so then you can deduct your tuition from your taxes. And so then that's why I'm saying it can be actually not that much more expensive to be able to do it at outside of Canada. That's why I say that.
Gotcha.
I don't know about the States because that's a totally different ballpark. But back
Right.
20 years ago when I did it, that's the way I sort of realized at the end. I thought, that's not wild, but.
Well, it's good to hear it. And thank you very much for that insight. I have another question for Momina here.
Okay.
She is asking, did you always want to become like a managing partner? Was it something that, you worked your way, like literally worked your way up to, and then had it and was like, this is, what I've always wanted to do? Or was it something that when you first joined your firm as the first associate, eventually I want to become the managing partner here? How did that kind of come about?
So I sat on my firm's executive committee for a very long time, like for a decade, probably before I became managing partner. And I hadn't really considered doing managing partner. Like it's one of those things that rotates amongst the partners. Not every partner will be managing partner, and people are managing partners for different periods of time. But when I was, did I volunteer or did someone ask me to do it? But when it happened, I was happy to do it if I had, and I always said that I served at the pleasure of my partners. So if people were, confident in my ability to do it, I'm happy to take it on. And I did have not this burning desire to be managing partner, but I certainly had ideas about sort of what I saw my role as. And so I really took an opportunity in those 3 years to do a lot of things to kind of, I'd say, hone my leadership skills. There are certain sort of like groups or seminars or conferences that are like focused on managing partners of mid-sized law firms. And so I did attend one, and it was probably attended by about 40 or 45 managing partners from all across Canada. It took place in Toronto, and it was really worthwhile to go to. One, you realize that managing partners across the country deal with very similar issues. So it's like, that's nice to hear. Two, the way that it worked is sort of what was said at that conference stayed at that conference, so you could have good discussions. But the other weird thing was that only about 10% of the managing partners there were women.
Wow.
So yeah, that's one thing I did discover when I was managing partner. Very few firms have female managing partners. It's better now, but terrible statistics. Yes.
Wow. Those are awful statistics. Absolutely terrible statistics.
That was just that conference. I don't know what it is across Canada, and I think it's getting better, but it goes back to the need for diversity, right? Like we just need more diversity in those sorts of positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Stacy, that's all the questions I have for you. I would like to give you the floor if you want to say anything, excuse me, if you want to say anything, if any students are allowed to contact you, if you want to put your email in the chat or anything like that.
So definitely people are able to contact me, and maybe I'll put it in the chat right now.
Sure.
And here we go. I'll put it in right now while I'm thinking about it. And I'm happy. I want to say thank you for this opportunity to address and answer some questions. Let me make sure I've spelt everything right. Yes. Okay, there it is. My email is in the chat now. I really want to just thank the pre-law shadowers for the opportunity to kind of chat with you guys, answer some questions, and just have an opportunity to have a discussion about, law school, practicing law, what to expect. So thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're very blessed, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day just to even come and address everything. So we really appreciate it, and I really appreciate everything that you've done for us. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Landon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you as well. Take care.